Overall sales is a very intriguing conversation. You've got people that are like, okay, this is a price that I'm okay with paying, and it seems like something worth getting into. But on the other side, there needs to be a seller attached to all those transactions. So where does that sweet spot happen where an expensive guy like Soto is still getting enough attention for purchases because people feel like the upside is there, and Burns is in a different tier of cost, but it's still the same conversation? It's one of the things that makes NFT projects interesting. You got to have both sides of it. What's up, Candy fam? I'm Nate, that's David, and this is the Talking Candy podcast. Each week, we take a dive into the Candy MLB NFT marketplace and give you an idea of what stood out the most to us. And while David and I each own collections of our own, none of this is financial advice. Please do your own research. We are just here to have a good time. If this podcast is helpful, useful, informative in any way, a like and a subscribe on these videos goes a long way in helping us grow this channel and reach more people. That being said, David, it's good to have you here. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Nate. I'm excited to talk about packs. I'm excited to talk about the marketplace. There's a lot of good things happening in the candy world right now.
Indeed. It was a big week last week. I think it was the day after we record. It was the day after we recorded this. It was moments after we posted the podcast from last week that we found out new packs were coming, April 12th. By far the most exciting thing that has happened in the last couple of months, something we've all been waiting for. So very much looking forward to that, and we're definitely going to dive into that as well. But as we do, let's start by diving into some of the biggest sales from the week. So we've got three serial ones that went this weekend. None of particularly high value, but these are just a cool subset of cards. Anytime you see the serial one go, it was somebody with particular interest in that player. They were willing to pay a premium to get one of the best versions of that card. So as you can see, we've got Kevin Gossman going for $888 on his Epic, Tristan Cassis going for $799 on his Rare, and Brandon Crawford going for $1185 on his Epic. I was surprised that you didn't scoop that one up. A couple cool Giants serial ones here. Yeah.
I don't mind missing out on Gosman since he was only a Giant, but briefly. But I definitely would have loved the Brandon Crawford 1 of 30 Epic. I'm saving up my balance right now, getting ready for new projects, new packs. Otherwise, that would have been a very tempting price point for me to pass on.
Yeah, the Epic 1 of 30s or 1 of 40s in the case of the Uncut Diamonds, those are cool because it's kind of the next best card after the 1 of 1. And in comparison, the Brandon Crawford 1 of 1 just sold for $25,000. So to grab the 1 of 30 for $1,100, it's a nice little budget way to get into a very elite card of a player that you like. So this was a cool one. We also had the Trout Serial 1 core sell last week, and this became the most expensive core sale to date. If you remember, we had the Correa 1 of 409 go for $6,000 in the opening weekend. I think it was on the first day, as a matter of fact. That one probably regrettable for the buyer based on everything that we've seen since then. Probably a little bit too quick to the trigger. This one was also quite expensive if using the typical 3x rule on floor prices, but I don't think that is the right way to account for a guy like Trout, the guys in the top 6. These are elite players. This is, like I said, these serial ones it's the only thing besides the 1 of 1 that has that elite tier to it. So it's going to be a specific selling price from whoever's holding that card. And yeah, so if they wanted $7,000, that's what it was going to be. And if somebody wasn't willing to pay it, they were going to hold it. So this was a cool one. This is a card that shows you that not everything is as simple as running numbers.
And I agree with that, but I also feel like, at 5x or closer to 6x of the core price for a Trout, it does feel like a bit more. But those are rule of thumbs for average players, and the top tier players aren't going to necessarily adhere to that same rule of thumb. So I'm sure it still feels worth it to the buyer. And if we see these Trout and these Ohtani cores return to their 2,000, 2,500 price points, then 7,000 for the one of is going to feel a lot better comparatively.
Yeah. And I agree. I agree that, putting it in a vacuum, maybe I don't make the decision to go 6, 7X on this, but again, it's the kind of card where you may have just had to bite the bullet if it's something you really wanted, because it may never have moved from that price. And then if we do see it go up to 2,000, 3,000 floor, then that price is gone forever. So definitely an interesting one. That was not the only interesting Trout on the week. We also saw 2 epic Trouts move, and these were already an extremely rare card to see executed in a sale. We've only seen 5 of them go so far, but 3 of them are now in the same collection, because the 2 that went this past week on the 15th and the 16th for 18,000 and 15,000 joined one that went on January 15th, opening day, as a matter of fact. So all 3 of these cards are in the same collection now, and they're 3 out of the only 5 that have sold total. So again, type of card where the price is what it is. It's expensive. It's not something that a whole lot of people are looking to move on from. It's one of the crown jewels that you could possibly be holding in this project in these early days right now. So this was pretty cool to see 3 of those going into the same exact collection.
Right, and I did have the privilege to speak with the buyer who purchased those 3 Trouts, and he's certainly happy with the decision he made to pull the trigger on the 3 of them. And he owns 10% of all epic Trouts. Just one person, 10% ownership. And Trouts are underpulled right now. If you look at epic Trouts, there's going to be 30 total someday. Currently, there's only 21. There are still 9 left in packs. And so this individual owns 1 out of every 7 epic Trouts. 3 out of the 21 that have been pulled so far. So it's definitely an elite collection that he's building there.
I'm going to pull that up real quick on Serial Chasers to show what you're talking about here. So we can see the 5 sales total, 3 of them happening in opening week, 2 of them on opening day. And then, let's see, it looks like, yeah, okay, so we've got these 2, 18,000 and 15,000 last week. But to your point, of the total 30 epics available, only 21 have been pulled. That leaves 30% or 9 remaining. That's disproportionate to what percentage of packs are unopened right now? 17%, something in that ballpark.
Let me just double check. It's 16% unopened.
16. So almost twice as many epic Trouts still available compared to what should have been pulled. So super interesting card. Current floor is 24,000. Anytime this card moves, gets pulled, anything related to it, it's going to be interesting. So we will definitely continue to keep our eye on those. And jumping back to Twitter, we had a member of the Candy fam, Hobbsy, shout out to Hobbsy, completed his full all-star set, and tweeted it out. We retweeted it. And I just wanted to make the note that if I see anything like this, I am happy to retweet things, give people shout outs, and it's just exciting to see other members of the community that are checking things off their to-do list and their hit list and having some little and big wins along the way. So if you're doing something that's exciting, tag Talking Candy NFT. Happy to retweet it. Happy to give some love. So congrats to Hobbsy on that one.
Yeah, and what sticks out to me the most is those 3 blue cards, all St. Louis Cardinals, and so you know where his loyalty lies. It's got cores across the board and that splash of blue for his preferred team.
Yep, love it. And then the kind of the finale of the top of the show here is we've got new packs coming. So Candy announced it last week. And April 12th is the date. We don't know much more beyond that. We do know that the chaser for the Sweet Futures basketball is going to come with the added utility of early access to these Candy Digital baseball packs. It won't be the only route to get early access. We don't know the other avenues to get that. I think that we're all speculating that if the Sweet Futures Chaser is going to come with that utility, that both the Prospect and All-Star set chasers are going to come with that utility as well. At least that's each of our speculation. I think many would share that viewpoint, but it'll be interesting to see what other things they may or may not throw in. That could be it. It could be that simple. It could be anything else. Who knows? Who knows what they have up their sleeve? It could be for owning a particular type of card. It could be owning, any number of things, a different particular rarity. But bottom line, April 12th, packs are coming. Get your candy balances ready. This is round 2.
Yeah, I can't wait to get more details on that. As most of us remember, back in October, packs cost $50 a piece. They came with 3 moments each, and those packs are currently selling for over $1,100 still on those All-Star packs. Now, we expect that the packs this time around aren't only going to contain All-Stars. It's going to be a much wider range of players. So you're going to have your third and fourth arm from the bullpen perhaps showing up. You're going to have your utility players who don't see play necessarily every day. You're going to have, not as many hits, across the board the same way you have with only the All-Stars. But personally, I'm very excited, and I'm hoping that there'll be more players, but that they'll keep the mint counts close to where they are right now. Because with that All-Star set, there's just 620 mints per player. And if they can keep it there, or if they don't go up too much higher, 750 mints per player, 800, less than 1,000 would be my own preference. But if they expand to include, 300, 400, 500 players instead of the 81, that would be a good way for them to have more packs to sell while not going too far overboard on those mint sizes. Because even with the 620, we've seen, some players that are just misses in terms of value. They just don't have enough people who want to own their copies to hold on to that value. And if you expand that roster even more, it's going to water down the value of these players.
Yeah, these first 2 sets that we have here they're kind of like training wheel sets where there was nothing horrible that you were going to pull. The worst case scenario was that you were going to get a stud reliever on a given team. So guys like Gregory Soto and Alex Reyes and Mark Melancon are guys that ended up, towards the bottom of the overall hierarchy, but there's still guys that are holding far above their pack rip value, and 2 and 3 X's on those. So once we get this set with, like you said, utility players, bench players, and it remains to be seen how deep they go. It could be 300 players, it could be 500 players, but there is going to be not only a greater opportunity to pull something that you're not necessarily thrilled about, but what I'm excited about on the back end in the secondary market is that it's going to mean that we have more opportunities to cherry pick players that we have a particular affinity towards, or feel that there's upside and a gap between what their current price is and what they could do throughout the baseball season. And so this is something that I've personally been doing for many years in MLB The Show, leveraging the fact that you've got guys that are undervalued for their preseason rating, stacking up a bunch of those guys and believing that they're going to go to higher ranks as the year progresses. And I think that this is going to provide the opportunity to do something like that. And I've spoken to the point of how I've done that with Brian Reynolds. I know that there's plenty of people that are stacking prospects in particular. That's always been an avenue in terms of prospect collecting. So I am very much looking forward to the fact that these packs will come with that ability to look a little bit deeper, to leverage some fantasy baseball knowledge, to leverage some MLB The Show knowledge, and take some flyers on some guys and see if you can hit on some guys that have upside throughout the season.
And I like that you mentioned fantasy baseball because that's one of the reasons why I feel pretty strongly that there will be more players in this pack rather than fewer. Why I think it's going to skew towards the 5 or even 600 players versus the 250 or 300 because they've already released that FAQ asking for people what they're looking for in a candy fantasy baseball type of environment. And having more players will kind of unlock the ability to have a more customizable fantasy experience on their platform. If you only gave us half of each roster, that's going to feel fairly limiting when we're trying to put together a fantasy team of some of the best performers if they're not even included in the set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's a balance, right? Because you don't need all the deepest players to make it work. It'll depend on what the format of the fantasy baseball gamification looks like.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at regular fantasy baseball, it depends on your league size. Are there 8 teams in your league or are there 15 teams in your league? And that's going to dictate some things. Are the rosters deep or are they shallow? So there are ways to do it where you are focused more on the top tier guys, and that's how fantasy sports work in general. But the more difficult leagues will go deeper with keepers, deeper roster sizes, more managers. So it'll depend on what the game looks like. Hopefully there are different versions of the game. I know you and I have both given some feedback. We both filled out that survey. I think that some of the questions were a little bit surface level in terms of, what should the format be? I think that less important than the actual format is making sure that they come up with something that caters to multiple different game modes for multiple different types of collectors, because everybody has a different quantity of cards. Everybody has a different value of cards. Not everybody can afford the cards above the core level, depending on if they got in on packs at the $50 value or if they entered secondary. We don't know how many packs people are going to be able to acquire on this second drop. So I'm just hoping that they find ways to maybe create divisions or just test run a few different game modes that allow for a deeper league with more options versus maybe a shallow league where you just pick 5 stars and you're going up against a bunch of different people, and it's a little something for everybody. I think that there's a lot of room for play here, and hopefully they try some different things en route to finding the right thing.
Yeah. And we both want to find out more information as well, like you said, about the different ways to qualify for the packs. And hopefully in the next week or two, we'll have those answers. We'll know how many total packs. We'll know how many packs you're allowed to purchase if you qualify for early access. Personally, I'd like to know if different early access methods will stack with each other. If I qualify from my Sweet Future Chaser and I qualify from my All-Star Set Chaser, do I get both, or am I restricted now to just the one or the other? There's lots of information still to find out, but we should see another announcement, I'm hoping, this week that will clarify some of that for us.
I would imagine so. We are only 3 weeks away, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks away from baseball, so everything is coming to a head here. The information, I'm sure, is around the corner, but obviously we are excited. Everything we've been waiting for is very near, and it'll be exciting to see how many packs we can get our hands on, and hopefully we'll have some packs to open on the show here. We'll see what we come up with,
and people will have to keep that in mind when they're making their sales, because there is still a 7-day window on getting access to that candy balance. So if you're planning to spend candy balance on those packs, that means you're going to want to be making your sales by April 5th. If you're still chasing a set and you're trying to complete that set by March 31st, and you're raising candy balance, that means you're going to want to make your sales by this Thursday, March 24th, or else you're not going to have your balance until after March 31st to check a couple more things off your list. So that 7-day window is still a consideration that you have to kind of plan around when you're considering candy balance for your purchases.
for sure. Dates to remember. March 31st, April 5th. Mark your calendars. All right, should we jump into the set floors and take a look at what we had this week?
Let's get into it.
All right, so new graphic here this week. Just plotting out a line chart showing what the floors have been along the way. And for me, I'm just a very visual person, so this is helpful for me. Obviously, you can see the big spike in that first week where we had the All-Star set up above 15,000. I think it was somewhere around 16.5 at its absolute peak. It was short-lived, and as we have talked about but not shown this type of visual, everything has been a slow bleed over the last couple months, as to be expected. No news was bad news for a while, but we do have some interesting little points here over the last couple weeks where we see on 3/6 to 3/13 was the first little run up after the CBA announcement. Good news, got a little bounce. So the All-Stars have come back down just a bit, kind of just sitting, waiting. But the Uncut Diamonds have continued their uptrend. And I know it's a little bit hard to see on this chart just because of the scale with having the All-Stars on there. But the Uncut Diamonds is an interesting one. It has continued to move up. We've seen some guys like CJ Abrams, who I know we're going to talk about, have big weeks. And I think that there's just a little added excitement about the prospects right now that is not currently injected into the All-Star set. And it's cool to look at.
Yeah, it's definitely very encouraging to see them put up green numbers 2 weeks in a row, especially after a solid month of downtrend. And I think to speak to what you were saying, the fact that we're seeing the performance of some of these prospects, playing ball right now, that gives a bit more enthusiasm to picking up extra copies, to staying focused on those prospects as they, start their seasons.
For sure. Also, shout out to NS9. They're doing a cool job of tweeting out a prospect of the day right now, showing their floor prices. They're highlighting a guy that had a particularly good night, and that was what raised my attention to CJ Abrams. So definitely check those guys out. Let me pull up the weekly movement in the All-Stars.
Yeah, we had some good movement again this week. We didn't have any numbers quite as high as we saw last week on the All-Stars, but they're close, and they're still higher than they were 2-3 weeks ago. And this week I did highlight a player at each rarity, just to showcase someone who had a particularly good week. Rafael Devers, he moved 7 cores, but in addition to those sales, he saw a pretty significant price increase on his cores. It had settled down to 140, and it's up again this week to 169. And that's on the back of those 7 sales, so that's a solid 20-21% increase on his cores. For the uncommons, we saw Shane Bieber making some price moves, moving 4 cores himself, but his price increase was pretty substantial on those 4 cores. His uncommon price got down to $99, and it's back up to $145 right now, 46% increase. And so if you see a name highlighted in blue right now, that's the reason why, because it's not just that they made sales, it's that we saw a pretty significant impact from those sales. Now, you see on Epic, we had Mike Trout with those 2 Epic sales. So we highlighted that. We touched upon that already with the tweet that went out. But on rares, we have a rare sight to see someone selling 6 rares in a single week with Matt Olson there. And I believe you put together a graphic for that one as well.
Yes. Yeah, so we got pretty interesting week across the board here from Olsen, who was our number 1 mover on the week across the board. But to your point, those 6 rare sales, that just doesn't really happen. And but in addition to the volume, the volume didn't tell the whole story because we saw a drop in floor price on the cores while we saw a rise in the floor price of the rares, and the uncommons pretty much sat there staying the same. But yeah, 5 cores, 3 uncommons, and 6 rare sales, and all tied, you have to imagine, to his move to Atlanta. This is a project that is tied to real baseball players, real athletes that are moving team to team. Their performances will dictate price movement as well. And it was exciting. It's exciting to currently be in some real talk about real baseball and seeing how the movement within real baseball has impact on the movement within the project.
Right, and especially as we see players move from smaller market teams to larger market teams or teams that are just playing particularly well, you're going to see more enthusiasm gravitate towards those players. And it's no knock against Oakland Athletics fans, but right now the Braves are the reigning champions, and so you can't really compete with that at the moment in terms of enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
You did mention the core price did dip compared to 1 week ago, but I did want to note that core price of 67, that is still up compared to 2 weeks ago. He just happened to have seen a particularly big rise last week, and so this is more of a normalization of price, and it still has some room to go up again.
I'm going to pull that chart up as well because it is an interesting one. You can see starting back on March 8th, we had a sale for $37, and it has just continuously gone up and up and up until around the 15th of March. And then, yeah, we had one sale for $67 yesterday, and we've got the floor that has settled back down in a little bit. It's currently sitting at 70, but yes, to your point, in general, and we touched on this last podcast, his price has gone up, and it's all tied to his trade to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Let me jump back into the weekly move.
Mm-hmm. And so you do see that put Olsen at the top for the week with 14 total sales. But on the overall column, I did highlight Freddie Freeman this week because he was one of the few big movers that moved a card at every rarity. And when it comes to rare sales and epic sales, not every player is moving a card every single week. But Freddie Freeman, in spite of finishing in the middle on that top list for overall sales, he definitely spread his sales out, selling 2 cores, 3 uncommons, 3 rares, and 1 epic. And so he had a very well-rounded sales week, which generally kept his prices. They didn't jump or fall too much, but it was just across the board a good week of sales for Freddie Freeman there.
And I don't know if you checked on where those 3 rares went, but they all sold on the same day. They all sold on the 17th, and they went for $750, $777, and $800. So effectively the same price. An interesting grouping anytime you see the same card sell in that type of volume all on the same day. Always raises the question.
I did miss that, and now that I'm looking at it, those sales occurred just minutes apart. So it's possible that someone was taking a pretty big gamble or placing a pretty large bet on the value of those Freddie Freeman rares. And they saw value at that 750 to 800 price point. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was the same person snatching all 3 of them up, with the fact that those sales came just minutes from one another. So
very likely.
It's a good thing to point out there.
All right, let's take a look at the all-time.
Yeah, we saw some ranking shakeups on the all-time list for the All-Stars. Now, if you're just looking at the overall list, you're still going to see Yusei Kikuchi sitting there at the top. And, Juan Soto still in second place, didn't gain much ground this week either. But there were, across the rarities, some good positional changes occurring. Rafael Devers in the core column moved into second place, leapfrogging Yu Darvish, which is going to be a theme across the list, because if you look down there on uncommons, Buster Posey moved into 3 after leapfrogging Yu Darvish. Walker Buehler cracking the list. Really no change in terms of order on rare and epics. There were quite a few rare sales made this week, just very few to people who had already sold a high number. Juan Soto did have one extra sale himself, going from 38 to 39, but most of the people with multiple sales in that rare category only had 15 or so heading into the week. So despite having a big week, it wasn't enough to push him onto that list. Not too many epic sales either, with Whit Merrifield making a couple epic sales to push his way to the bottom of that list. But then overall, we see Corbin Burns moved up several spots to leapfrog Yu Darvish. Rafael Devers, he edged out Ozzy Albies to hold the 6th spot. Acuna jumped over Trey Turner to get into 8th, and Jose Ramirez, the only new name on the overall list, after having a good number of sales himself. In fact, he was one of the ones that had 9 sales this week, and so that was enough to crack the overall list.
Just pulling up Corbin Burns here real quick. He's been a name that I feel like has come up several shows in a row now, and he just keeps bumping up another spot, another 2 spots on that overall list. This is Cy Young winner, a guy that I personally grabbed a few of. I know I've spoken to this before. He just didn't seem to be getting the right level of respect. I don't know if it's because people just don't believe it until they fully see it, although I feel like a Cy Young is seeing it. He was already nasty the couple years leading up to that, and to see his volume continue to increase, and we're seeing an uptick in his core prices just creeping up. It had been down somewhere in the 60 to 70 range, and it's just kind of moved its way up. The most recent sale was actually 124. That was a low 22 serial, so probably had some impact on it. A lot of these others are kind of middling serials, but yeah, this is a guy that has as much upside as anybody in terms of becoming one of the new solidified stars of the MLB. So cool to see his name continuing to creep up the list there. And I'll just pull up Jose Ramirez real quick as well, because why not? It was 9 core sales, you said? Or 9 overall?
9 overall sales for Jose Ramirez. 6 cores, 3 uncommons, and nothing above that this week.
Gotcha. Yeah, so nothing too crazy to look at here, but always nice to have the visual. So.
Well, and as someone makes their way onto that overall list, that does speak to the consistency that they're able to drive sales. I did look back on where Corbin Burns ranked when we started these graphics a few weeks ago, and he was, 6th or 7th place, now pushed his way into the top 3, behind only Juan Soto and Yusei Kikuchi. And so if Juan has some more kind of lackluster weeks, Corbin Burns may be the one who ends up challenging Yusei Kikuchi for that top spot if he keeps it up. And because his prices aren't as high as Juan Soto's, it's not as unreasonable to think that there could be, 10 or 11 sales that he puts up each week, because it's not going to cost $400 or $500 a piece.
The overall sales is a very intriguing conversation, because it means that you've got people on both sides of the coin that are interested in that transaction. So you've got a number of people feeling like, okay, Corbin Burns, Juan Soto, Kikuchi's his own conversation, but let's just talk about Burns and Soto. And you've got people that are like, okay, this is a price that I'm okay with paying, and it seems like something worth getting into. But on the other side, there needs to be a seller attached to all those transactions. So it's a lot of people saying, okay, there's liquidity here. People are interested in it. It's a relatively easy one to generate funds, whether you're looking to cash out or reinvest. And so, yeah, it's where does that sweet spot happen where an expensive guy like Soto is still getting enough attention for purchases because people feel like the upside is there, and Burns is in a different tier of cost, but it's still the same conversation of it's just making sense on both sides of the equation for the buyer and the seller. And it's one of the things that makes NFT projects interesting. It's that you got to have both sides of it.
Right, and I think it's good of you to mention that because I think too often I'm just looking at the willingness of people to buy at the prices wherever they happen to be, but they don't happen to be there for no reason. Those prices are there because either someone got in at a particular price and that's where they're willing to let go, or it could be a card that they didn't pay much for because they pulled it from a pack, but it still has value to them in terms of their perceived value of what that player should be worth. And so it isn't just how willing someone is to pay a price, as you mentioned.
Yep. And I also wonder with a guy like Corbin Burns if there's an education gap there, because he is somebody that you need to have a little bit more of an understanding of the MLB to know his relevance. He was the Cy Young winner, but he's not a huge name yet. And just like you could ask a lot of people who Juan Soto is, and they are not going to know who he is the way that they might know who a top basketball player is. There just isn't that same type of visibility with a guy. LeBron Soto is not a fair comparison, but Trout LeBron is a relatively fair comparison, and you're going to have a whole lot more people knowing who LeBron is than Trout. And so when you look at that with Soto, when you look at that with Burns, there's maybe a lack of value being given to a guy like Burns because he's just not as huge a name yet, even though he has as much potential as anybody. Should we jump into the Uncut Diamonds?
Yeah, I think that was pretty good on the All-Stars there. A lot to keep an eye on, but let's look at the weekly sales.
And as referenced before, CJ Abrams right up at the top with 18 sales. He is 4 for 6 over the last week with 2 home runs to start spring training. So the hype along with his performance has correlated to his overall sales.
Right. I like that you're looking into that because that's something that I don't think I pay enough attention to, is how these players are actually performing from day to day, from week to week. And I think we can see that pretty clearly here. You see CJ Abrams highlighted at the top of that overall list, but you can also find his name on all 4 of the other lists. At the top of core and uncommon, and cracking the bottom of the rare and epic lists as well. So he moved cards. Not quite as many as Nick Gonzalez did last week. He didn't put up a 20 spot, but 18 is impressive. And you can see that just across the whole page there, with his name showing up again and again.
I would say his 18 this week is more impressive than Nick Gonzalez last week, because Nick Gonzalez was amongst a whole bunch of huge numbers, unlike anything we had seen in a given week. But for Abrams, he's just, Cavalli at 14, impressive, and there's some 13s on there. But when you look at that whole list, that 18 really stands out compared to the rest of the list. So it's very exciting to me to finally see some real baseball tying into this project, because I think that that's where the real opportunities present themselves.
And that's fair, because Nick Gonzalez, he did definitely benefit from having a high sales week during that CBA week, and that carried everyone, I think, to some higher numbers. But this was just CJ Abrams doing it by himself, and distancing himself from the field in a week that didn't have such a big news cycle.
And I was just going to pull up CJ Abrams' Uncut chart here, because he had one in particular sold for $300. It was Serial 8. Now, I don't know what his jersey is. These cards don't say the jersey, and this picture doesn't show it, so I would have to look that up. But I don't know if that's his jersey or if it's just a product of being a low serial. It's not absurdly high compared to what but it is double. So I'm not sure if 8 is his jersey or not. But it's also a risky maneuver paying up for a prospect jersey, because you don't really know what they're going to get when they get up there. So same thing that we've seen with some of the Sweet Futures stuff. Unsure about, valuing jerseys because these guys are in college. It doesn't mean that they're still going to pull that jersey into the pros if they get that far. So I don't know. Are you looking that up?
Now, a quick Google is listing CJ Abrams at 87, but that might just be minor league jersey, so
Yeah,
they may be looking at something else. But it's possible that that 300 was just valuing number 8 just as a single digit number. Some people do give some outsized influence to those low numbers, even if it's not the number one. But maybe they know something we don't. Maybe there is a possibility of him flying number 8 in the bigs,
that'd be some
and
some
that could
good insider information.
mhm, that would be a very calculated risk that might pay off for them.
Yep. Go back to the weekly movement,
To the weekly.
or did
Okay.
you want to go? Did you want to shift to the all time?
Let me just touch on the other highlighted names on the
Okay.
weekly real quick. And it was the same as the All Stars. I've highlighted the ones that not only made sales, but saw some pretty big price moves. And so we saw Bobby Witt Jr. with those 9 sales increase his core price by 54%. We saw Francisco Alvarez with those 3 sales increase his uncommon price by 26%. Rutschman increased his rare price by 33% with 2 sales. And Brendan Davis with an impressive 3 epics, increasing his epic price 31%. And so those are some pretty big jumps on the back of those sales for each of those players. And so I'm not sure if some of those, like those 3 epics, I don't know if it was just they got priced to move, or if there was some other factor like we saw with Abrams that was driving those Brennan sales. But 3 epics in 1 week is pretty significant.
So pulling up the Brendan Davis epics here. It looks like besides the serial one, which went for 1,300 on the 13th, it looks like the rest of them were in line with what they had been going for. If anything, on the higher end. Not that there's been a huge volume since February 22nd. We've seen 6 of these go. 600, 425, which probably got picked up quickly, 530. And then of these last 3, 550, 600, and then the serial one went for 1,300. So serial one, 1,300 feels like pretty reasonable there, about a 2.5 multiplier. And the other ones that went seemed to go relatively in line with what he's being priced at. So yeah, it doesn't look like they were particularly snipes. They were just somebody decided they wanted some Davis in their life.
Yeah, well, they got him, and it's with any of these prospects, there's a lot of upside on these high rarity cards. If any one of them goes on to have a fantastic career, that's going to be a major. Just can you imagine having the Otani rookie card or the Trout rookie card at the prices they're seeing right now on their All-Star cards? You know, having the very first NFT for a player would be huge if they go on to become that level of superstar.
Absolutely. I mean, the desire to have rookie cards is already a huge thing, but in baseball, Bowman, for those who aren't familiar, that's the crown jewel of getting the first Bowman of these new prospects. So this is the equivalent of that. This is the first iteration of prospect baseball cards. This is the Bowman of NFTs right now. And I just pulled up the Bobby Witt as well. This is a guy that sold 210 cores. I mean, the volume, the increase in his floor price over the last week or so, probably a guy that I'm going to regret not grabbing one of. I'm a little bit, I lean towards the All-Stars, one, because it's what I know better, but two, because it just comes with a little bit less risk betting on a guy that's already in the bigs to do more. But I commend everybody that does their research on this stuff, because it really is one of the more exciting parts of baseball. It's something that I've slowly gotten a little bit more interested in. And honestly, MLB The Show has been something that has exposed me a little bit more to prospects, because they've started implementing prospect cards into the game. So it is really cool to look at what these things could be when you compare them to these all-star prices. These cards are going to be in far higher demand for any of the players that do actually hit. And it's going to be really cool to see if Witt blows up, if Davis blows up, if CJ Abrams blows up, some of these guys are going to have big years, and then it's going to be really fun data to look at and see how the market reacts to, okay, this might be something really, really special.
Mm-hmm. And I know when I completed my Uncut Diamond set, it was difficult paying high prices for some of these players that I'm just not very familiar with. I was checking when I bought my Bobby Witt Jr. core. I paid $275 for it, which at the time was a bargain because they were mostly selling in the mid to high 300s, and so I got a bit of a snipe on that particular day. But then as we saw a decline in the market, I started to regret it just a little bit because his price fell back below what I paid for it. But this past week has been more of a return to form for him. But the point I was trying to make is if you bought the whole set, then you're kind of hedging your bets because if only two or three of these players go on to have fantastic careers, that could recover your entire investment on the set based upon the few who go on to become stars. And when you look at these curated players that Candy selected to include in this set, many of them are rated as some of the best prospects in baseball. If you look at a top 30 list of prospects, the ones included in this uncut diamond set are a pretty high number of them, making the top of that list.
Yeah, this was as far as gambling on prospects go, I really like the way that you just kind of put a bow on that, which is that if you just look at it as the whole thing, which right now we're sitting right around 3,000 for the whole set, if you are betting on both the Candy Digital product as a whole and being early to it, combined with the multiplier that could occur with a player blowing up, it is not hard to imagine that a Bobby Witt core on its own could at some point make up half or all of that set all on its own. If he were to now I'm not talking about in the short term. I don't mean this year, but I mean if you're somebody that is holding these cards and this project goes on to be what we all believe it's capable of being, and you combine that with the player actually blowing up, anything is possible here. So yeah, for the long-term investor, it seems like you've got 30 lottery tickets and you don't need very many of them to hit to have it maintain the value of what will inevitably have some cards that fall off as well.
Right, and I find it far more difficult to believe that all 30 of these players are going to fail to make a splash, based upon how they're currently projected to do. So it wouldn't even require fantastic odds to see some of these players stick around in the major leagues for quite some time.
Certainly. Was there anything else on the all-time uncut that you wanted to touch on there?
The most impressive thing is just CJ Abrams, his name in the blue up there in the 5th spot. His name is blue because he wasn't on the overall top 10 last week, but he not only crashed onto the list, but drove himself halfway up that list with his 18 sales this week. Otherwise, there weren't too many other significant changes, just a couple minor positional changes here and there, and a couple new names showing up on the bottom of those lists.
Yeah, that's a crazy one because since you added in these blue highlights for the new entrants onto any given list, we have not seen a guy, I don't think we've seen a guy jump that high up onto a list on his first week. So typically it's the Brennan Davis or the Spencer Torkelson going into that lowest spot and then working their way up. But to have him catapult all the way up into the middle, especially when you consider Torkelson's down there, Davis is down there at 272, 264. That's a big jump up to 283. So pretty cool week. And again, beating a dead horse, but cool to see that it's tied to real baseball performance. So that does it for baseball data. Let's quickly touch on the final Sweet Futures drop for college basketball. It's going on right now. By the time we release this, it'll be yesterday. But the crown jewel of these Sweet Future basketball drops was always going to be Chet Holmgren, That came out today. He's the stud on Gonzaga, expected to be a lottery pick into the NBA. And like we've touched on before, just one of the cool things about this is that it's a little something for everybody. You've got the open mint on the cores, which limits the time but not the quantity. The rares and the epics, those both sold out pretty much right away. Those were limited in quantity but not time. Unlike some of the previous players, the epics sold out similar to the Duren epics almost right away. The rares sold out within 15-20 minutes, and the legendary 1 of 1 you can bid on Bitsky. So check those out. It's Holmgren and Kendall Brown. But with that, that is all we've got. My name is Nate. That's David. This is the Talking Candy podcast, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Check. The grills in my mouth double as a freeze. The grills in my mouth double as a freeze. The grills in my mouth double as a freeze. The grills in my mouth